Travel and Things in association with Rugged Wear, Real People, Real Clothing, Real Solutions presents In Conversation With. I'm your host, David Batsoffen, and today I am joined by the author of this brand new novel, Tony Park. Tony, good morning. Welcome to you.
David, thanks. It's great to be here.
The Pride. This is what, number 20 in your series?
That's correct.
Take us through, before we get into the meat of this particular book, why this particular genre?
I think, David, there's a very good adage in writing. One says there's one thing that says write about what you write about what you know, but also write the sort of books you like to read. So I've always been a fan of thrillers. Sometimes a little bit of historical fiction, and some of my books have had a historical bent. But I think it's important, if you want to write, that you write about stuff that you're interested in. So I like reading thrillers, and as a result of what was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime holiday to South Africa from Australia back in 1995. For whatever reason, I got addicted to the amazing continent and this fantastic country. And it certainly provided no shortage of inspiration for the genre that I write in thrillers, because there is so much happening here, as you would know, any given day of the year.
True enough, but is your next novel going to involve a electricity company that can't supply electricity, perhaps, and the shenanigans that go on around that?
I had a reader email me recently saying, your books are not reflective of real life. I must say most of the feedback I get is very positive. Your books are not reflective of real life because there's no load shedding in your books. Well, I've fixed that in next year's novel. Trust me, there's plenty of load shedding because it reflects the writing process at the moment.
Well, what I suggest you do is just put out a book of blank. Every second or third page be blank. And then you can say, that's when the load shedding happened. I couldn't write. It's not going to be...
And people can burn it to keep warm.
Yeah, exactly. And then what is with you and helicopters? Because it's not a novel of yours if there's a helicopter involved.
Yeah, that's very true. I was asked by another interviewer if I had a helicopter fetish, and it's interesting because I've had to think about it. When I was growing up as a little kid, we lived near a military base, and there were choppers around all the time. And growing up, I thought there's two things I was interested in doing. I was interested in going into the military, and the only thing in life I really wanted to do was write a book. And I thought if I could have picked my ideal job, I would have been a helicopter pilot / novelist. Unfortunately, as soon as I got to enter the Australian Defence Force as a helicopter pilot, were maths and physics, and I very quickly learned I could do neither of those. So I was pretty good at English, so I thought I'd better stick to my other ambitions. But I've always been fascinated with them, and yeah, I love flying. Yeah.
Well, there you go. So that gets that out of the way. Your chief protagonist in the new book, in The Pride, is a woman. Any reason for that? How do you choose your lead characters?
Yeah, it's interesting, David. I'm not the sort of writer that plots out what I'm going to do. I don't have a plan. I'm supposed to start. I've written my 21st novel, which comes out next year, and I was supposed to start the 22nd one about now, and I have no idea what I'm going to write about. I'm hoping I won't get a flash of inspiration. So I very much make stuff up on the spot, and that either goes to how I write. I don't have a plot or a plan. I make it up as I go along, and also how I'm going to start off. So about 12 years ago, I started on what would be the first in the 5-book series. The latest episode is The Pride, and that features a female mercenary private military contractor by the name of Sonia Kurtz. Now, all I knew when I started that book back in 2010 is I thought, I'll write a book about mercenaries. I was actually I'm a Land Rover man. I was at my Land Rover mechanic, a guy I had got to know very well and spent a lot of time there. And I met a charming old fellow there, a South African guy, and he was telling me about how he worked in the Congo, in the
Mm.
DRC. And I said, "Oh, are you a miner? Because I know there's a lot of mining." No, he says, "I was a mercenary." And I thought, well, I could write a book about mercenaries. And then I was just thinking about it. And I thought, if you're going to write a book about mercenaries, your go-to character is probably some Chuck Norris, Bruce Willis type chap,
Yeah.
whatever. And but then I started. I was actually reading a book about the South African military contracting company, Executive Outcomes. And
About
Eben
Eben
Barlow, who
Barlow
wrote
and
that book,
Eben
made an
Barlow and the boys.
observation that he was quite surprised
Yeah.
by the number of form. Yeah, and he was surprised by the when he was recruiting for Executive Outcomes, the number of female ex-service people from the old South African Defence Force who applied for jobs. And I thought, why not? And I, having served in the military by that stage, I was in the Australian Army Reserve for about 34 years. I served with a lot of fantastic women in from various services and overseas. From different nationalities, and I thought, well, we could have a book about mercenaries, but it could be a female private military contractor, and that's what gave rise to Sonia Kurtz. And I must say, I've also kind of been drawn to or liked books with strong female characters. So there was a few things that came together there when I set her off on her path, which has culminated in the fifth book, which is The Pride.
Of doom and destruction. She seems to want to take apart the African continent single-handedly. You mentioned earlier that you get feedback from your readers. Do you ever get feedback from readers who have similar or the same surname as the baddies in your book, going, "Why have you used my name as a bad character? I wanted to be, sort of the matinee idol of your book, and now I'm a head poacher."
I do. I have a funny thing where these days, what I do to come up with the names of characters, a lot of real people have their names used in these books
Yeah.
because I get invited to speak at a number of fundraising events, and one of the most popular things we can do at a charity auction these days is auction off the name of a character. So good people pay good money, excuse me, to be a character in the book. But the caveat is I say you don't get to choose. You could end up the baddie, and sometimes I don't know. I think people are just happy to have their name in a book if they're the real person. I know one or two probably would have preferred to have been the hero of the heroine, but you know what you sign up for. The only exception I ever made to that rule is I had a guy by the name of Peter in Australia who donated money to a painted dog, wild dog fundraiser, and he says, "I know I don't get a say," he says, "but I would like to be the baddie." And I said, "Well, that's interesting. No one's ever asked to be the baddie." And he said, "No, I don't want to just be bad. I want to be evil and mean and nasty." I said, "Oh, okay. Well, since you've asked, I can make an exception." I said, "What do you do for a living?" He says, "I'm a policeman."
Job done. So, for people who haven't read the book, Tony, take us through without any spoiler alerts, because I don't want to skip to the last page and read the last line and go, "Sorry for you. Now you don't have to buy the book. You know how it ends," type of thing.
Yeah. So Sonia's story, as well as you say, taking the African continent apart and getting involved in minor conflicts all over the place. Her backstory is she's a single mother. She's had a very checkered, very unfortunate history with men during the course of her life. And as a working single mother, she has been estranged from her daughter Emma for quite a lot of Emma's life. And when we meet Emma in the Pride, when we catch up with her again in the Pride, she's finished university. She's actually working as an archaeologist, as a military archaeologist, so looking at battlefields. But she has grown up with her grandmother looking after her in England. In a boarding school. Sonia's been tearing around Afghanistan, Iraq, Africa, and like a lot of working mothers, certainly something I encounter in Australia, where both parents invariably work. That some mothers wish they had more time with their and I'm sure many parents can identify with that. And so are in the Pride, and they go off on a little holiday together. They're actually in the Cape and down at Silver Sands Beach, and they come across some abalone poachers. Now, Emma is the academic intellectual. She's not particularly approving of her mother's military occupation or background, but the apple, shall we say, does not fall far from the tree. And she's also a strident environmentalist, and she picks a fight with these abalone poachers, and that sets in chain a series of events that put both Sonia and Emma in peril as they get embroiled, tangled up in the murky world of abalone poaching, which of course is funded and fueled by organised crime in different parts of the world. And that brings them into conflict with some pretty bad people. And it's actually Sonia who gets in trouble in this book. And can Emma come to her rescue this time around?
You put yourself in a position. You talk about abalone poachers and where their backing comes from. You as a writer, in amongst your emails, do you ever get death threats going, leave this industry alone, we know where you live, type of thing, which could be the opening of your next book or the one after that?
Fortunately, no, but I will say in all seriousness that the real people that I sometimes do suffer that have had death threats. And if you look at the tragic case recently of Anton Mzimba, the head ranger at the Timbavati,
Yes.
was actually killed in the line of his duty.
Yeah.
And
they killed him at his
I was
house.
also dealing with a chap. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, real people face real threats. It's just we have to take seriously. It hasn't rebounded on me personally, but I think, there's a lot of stuff in the public domain about these problems. I think the interesting thing I found with abalone poaching was I had a number of people over the years, readers, contact me saying, you must write about this, you must write about this. And I thought, yeah, I know, it's a deal, it's an issue. And I thought it's probably a pretty big issue, but it wasn't until I started researching that I realized just how serious it is, where we have a legal abalone market in South Africa, and quotas and companies that are involved in that. But the demand for abalone in Asia, and interestingly enough in Hong Kong in particular, which I always sort of associated as a fairly law-abiding sort of place, the demand for this shellfish is estimated to be 17 times the size of the legally available quota. So this is a huge market, a huge illegal market. And then I learned that it's not just your artisanal fisherman, the odd poacher who wants to go bag a few for the whole restaurant. This is organized by the Cape numbers gangs in South Africa. And the Chinese triads that buy the abalone pay for it in the raw materials needed to make tick, methamphetamine. And so this huge international trade with billions of rand is also fueling the drug problem in South Africa. And it's a transnational crime, because South Africa, we must give credit where credit is due, is able to police its borders to a certain extent when it comes to imports and exports. So a lot of the abalone taken from the Cape is actually trucked out of, dried, and then trucked out of South Africa into neighbouring countries such as Mozambique, and bizarrely, Zimbabwe, the landlocked country of Zimbabwe, is one of the largest exporters of abalone on the continent, in the world. So the stuff is moved illegally by road to Zimbabwe, and then exported legally from. It's a fascinating multinational high. I did not know enough about this issue.
Yeah, we tend to forget, Tony, because rhino and pangolin are front of mind at the moment, because of what they are and what they represent. We not only have abalone, but we also have avocado and macadamia nut crime that I knew nothing about until I went to spend some time in Nelspruit. And the amount that is illegally harvested at night there by avocado poachers is unbelievable. It's a whole new book for you.
that's a new one for me. I could write a book about that, definitely.
You can indeed. It was the tonnage was like 40 tons a night of the stuff that's moved. And South Africa, I discovered this morning, is
It's amazing.
supplies a quarter of the world's macadamia nuts. So there is a big demand for these things. But anyway, we digress. We're talking about Tony's current novel, not ones to come. It's called The Pride. It's published by Macmillan, and it's available already. People can get it in time for the festive season.
Yes, very much so. Yeah. Out in
Yeah.
time. It actually came out around September or so, but that was in the lead up to Christmas. So it's still very much
I have to say,
and I think it's
for
doing
me,
well. I'm very grateful to my South African readers.
Well, we're grateful to you that you keep putting these things out at the rate of one a year, because there are some writers who come up with a really good idea, put out one book, and everybody goes, yes, when's the next one coming? And they go, well, maybe in 3 years' time. And then you go, no, I can't wait 3 years. I'll read it in a foreign language if that's what you want to publish in. But the other thing that I must say about the book, Tony, is that it's published in a font that I can read. I will open a book, the cover may be exciting. I take one look at the font that's sort of 8-point, and I go, no, I couldn't be bothered. I'm not going to fight these pages under room lighting conditions. But your book is published. I don't know whether it was with that in mind or it just so happened to work out that way.
Yeah, I think a lot of readers, we have different ways we can read now with e-readers and audio books. There's so many choices. I think the good old traditional trade paperback, which that is, it's the modern day version of the hardcover. I think a lot of people do appreciate that for exactly the reason that you're saying, is because those of us who do prefer a print book, many of us, we can't read a small paperback. I first noticed my eyesight going with my reading, is harder. My arms weren't long enough to read anymore.
So I was going to say, what do we? Firstly, I must question the blurb there. Tony Park is a master storyteller. I love his work. Dion Meyer. Did you write on the top of on one of Dion's books? Dion Meyer is a master storyteller. I love his book, Tony Park.
I'm always on Dion Mayer's Facebook and Instagram accounts, telling him and all of his readers how much I love his books, because I do it. I've met Dion a few times at writers' festivals and things, and he's a lovely, lovely guy. Such a nice guy. Now, we don't, when we meet in person, we don't talk about each other's books or anything like that. And I never even imagined that he had read any of my books. And so my publishers asked him if he would put a comment on my book. They didn't tell me, probably in case he said no. So I was thrilled that Dion had even read any of my books, because we do cross paths quite often. For what it's worth, I think he is the best crime writer in the world. In the world. And I say that having read many of the big name crime writers around the world, and he is getting the recognition he deserves overseas. And I think the good thing I've found in the South African kind of writing fraternity or industry is that it's very collegial and very supportive. We get on and we sort of appreciate each other's and we read each other's stuff, and we kind of are happy to help each other out. So it's a good sort of fraternity or sisterhood. It's a good group of people to be amongst.
I have to tell you that your book, much like Dion's, there's one problem with it, is that when you start reading it, when I start reading it, I realize that I'm picking up speed as the character and as the plot line develops. And I read faster and faster, and I try and slow down, and I can't. And then I get to the end of the book quicker than I thought, and I'm going, damn you, Tony. Why did you do this? Why don't you write a novel that just shuffles along gently like a geriatric in an old age home? But no, you want to do a rocket ship going to Mars.
Yeah. I know my wife knows if I'm reading a Dion Mayer, I tune out. She doesn't talk to me for a day or so. And it's a shame because you do wait all year for another book. I know. I mean, I have
Exactly.
readers saying to me, why don't you write faster? And I feel like saying to them, why don't you read slower?
Exactly. You could send it out as an ebook, but one chapter a month, for a whole year. The book is
Yeah.
written.
And some people are doing that.
Mm.
Some writers are going down that path. I mean, I did do two books this year to try and satisfy people, but I did a non-fiction book called Rhino War as well with Major General Johann Euster. And while that is General Euster's memoirs about his time heading up the anti-rhino poaching fight in Kruger, I think it went down well this year because it could have been a novel.
Yeah.
Again, like we're talking about with the scale of the abalone poaching, and you mentioned rhinos and pangolins. We are aware of the rhino issue. I think again with that book and working with General Euster to tell his story, I was also surprised by the intensity of action and conflict in the Kruger Park back in 2012, 2013, 2014, when things were even worse than they are now. That was an eye opener for me, just exactly what was going on in my
Yeah.
backyard then. But David, even if you write two books a year, sometimes it's not enough.
There are fast readers out there who skim through these things. The book is called The Pride. It's the 20th novel in the series by Tony Park. It's published by Macmillan, and it's available currently across all formats and platforms. You can get it as an ebook. You can buy it as it's a great holiday read because it's our big book.
And it's a
No,
beach book
It,
as
it
well.
is it is indeed. Years ago, I interviewed a professor who'd written a book on running, and I said to him, your book is toilet reading, because that's where the book lived, in our toilet at home. And every time I'd go in, I'd dip into a chapter because it was technical and it wasn't a novel as such. And that was I found the best. And he said to me, "You're not the only person to tell me that."
I think we
But
take what we can get as authors. I think that's great.
exactly. But the
That would
pride
be
is
a good. I
definitely
would consider that a compliment.
Yeah, the Pride is definitely not toilet reading unless you intend to be there for a long while. Tony,
That's great, David. Thank you very much.
it's a play. You can use that as the blurb on your next cover. It's not toilet reading unless you're going to be there for a
I
long
will.
while.
I love it. I'll use that. Thank you, David.
Tony Park, it's been wonderful chatting to you. I wish you all the best with the Pride. I wish you a wonderful Christmas and New Year, and we look forward with eager anticipation to the next book in the series.
Thank you, David, and thanks for your interest in and support of, if I might say, local writers and local literature. It's much appreciated. Thank you.
It's only a pleasure. My guest today on In Conversation With has been Tony Park. Tony, once again, thanks very much for joining me.